Welcome to today's online message from Long Eaton Oasis Christian Centre. We are a church at the heart of the community with a heart for the community. And we're so glad that you've joined us. We hope that you'll be inspired and encouraged today. Please don't hesitate to contact us. If you want to find out more, you can visit our website www.longeatonoasis.co.uk or you can direct message us.
Well, hello, great to be with you, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are looking together as we're sharing in a series, Serve, and today I'd like to take a few moments to share on the power of service. You know, when you and I decide to serve God, to serve other people, the power of God can be released through our lives. It's quite an amazing thing, and we're going to just explore this theme over the next few moments, so thank you for being with us. Going to share a story. It's an account from Mark's Gospel, chapter 6, verses 34 to 44, and it's where Jesus feeds the 5,000, and something amazing happens, and it all takes place because a young boy decides to give his food on that day and to serve, and this is what happens. And so it reads, "When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. 'This is a remote place,' they said, 'and it's already too late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat.' But he answered, 'You give them something to eat.' They said to him, 'That would take more than half a year's wages.'" They were absolutely flabbergasted by this. "Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus told them to make all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. 3 simple thoughts that I'd like to share today based on this account and how we may know the power of God released as we serve him. And this is quite amazing. First thing is this. Jesus says to them, and the first point is this, it's found in verse 3, he says, "You give them something." The disciples come to Jesus and say, "You know, send these people away. There's far too many. They're getting hungry and we have no means of feeding them." And Jesus says, "You do it. You give them something to eat." You know, God looks to you and I to step out for him. It's not that we have to work, but there is a point in our faith where we're called to step out. We can't just sit back. And this is what Jesus is basically saying here to them is, what are you going to do? And to step out. And they were absolutely mortified when he says this to them. What, us? You know, me? Us? You know, that would take half a year's wages. And so it was true. It would have done with the amount of money they had per day. It would have took half a year's wages to feed all of those people. It's interesting, James, as he writes his letter to the dispersed church some years later, in James chapter 2, verse 26, James says this about the Christian faith. He says, "Faith without works is dead." In other words, you can't just sit back. Yes, I've got faith, but you have to, at times, step up, step out, and accountable to God as we seek to serve him and serve others. Now, this is really amazing, and we see this in this account, is that it's this. When you and I step out, God steps up. You know, it's not all about us. We can't do it so per se, but God does look to us to do something. And then he does everything. He does everything. And this is exactly what happens on that day as Jesus says, well, you do something. You step out, then God steps up, and then there's an amazing miracle happens. A power is released. The power of God is released on that day. I found this in my own life, and perhaps you can experience this too. But when I do what I can do, God will do what I can't do. When you and I do what we can do for God, then He will come and do all that we can't do. It's the same idea again. As we step out, God steps up, and that there's a release of His power. I'm not powerful in myself, but as I step and give my life to God, He releases His power through my life. This is how He chooses. This is what He chooses to do through you and I. We very often, I hear Christians and people say, want to see the power of God, and God, come and you do it. This is what the disciples were saying to Jesus. And Jesus said, well, what about you? And when they did step out, falteringly as they may have done, He then stepped up. It's interesting because in John's account of this story, we're reading it from Mark, but John says in his similar account of this very same story, he said Jesus says this to them to test the disciples. He was looking at their faith. Were they going to just sit back and you do it all, Jesus? Or were they going to play their part and then God does His part? And that's the first thing we see. The second thing that we can learn in this process of God's power being released through our service is that it says that in the account, in John's account, the boy gave what he had. We read in verse 38 of Mark, which is what we've just read. It said, Jesus says, well, what have you got? You do it. And then they go and have a look, and the disciples said, we found 5 loaves and 2 fish. We found 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's in Mark's account. Now, in John gives a bit more to the backstory. He paints a slightly vivid picture, and he says that a boy has 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. In Mark's account, it says that we've got 5 loaves and 2 fish. But John shows that it's a little boy, a young lad, a young boy, a child who has brought their lunch, and it's 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. The task was huge. The fish and loaves were small. Now, Michael William Barclay says about those barley loaves, he says barley loaves were the cheapest of bread. They were a very coarse type of bread. It was the cheapest of the bread that you could have, and the fish would have been sardine-like. They were really small, and in those days, the small type of fish that they would have had with these barley loaves would have been highly salted, small fish. It was really like a pauper's lunch, really, simplest of lunches, and yet this is what he had, and he gave it. And the thought is this on this. And it's this: don't be put off by the size of task. Don't let the task put you off, or the call put you off. I'm not going to do. Let someone else do that. That's not for me. I can't do that. I can't do very much on my own. I won't make very much of a difference. Let someone else do that. That's not for me. Don't be put off, and do it. That's what Jesus says. What can you do? Do it. And if we all do it, we could start a chain reaction. And this is the amazing thing about service. Sometimes they say, well, it's not for me, and I can't do that, and it won't make much of a difference, and others will do it. But if I play my part, if you play your part, and we all do it, and we all played our part, and we all serve, we can start an amazing chain reaction, because God releases His power through service. This is what this account shows us, that God's power comes as we serve, as we give. And so don't be put off. And that's what we see with this boy. The disciples go to look to find the fish and the loaves, and they find a boy who says, okay, this is it. Don't be put off. So, another thing I would say is start with what you have, where you're at. Don't look at others. What they're doing, what they're not doing. Sometimes in church and church life, we can look at others and, they're not doing very well. I haven't got time. I'm not going to do that. If they're not doing it, I'm not going to do it. It can be that type of thing can creep in. Or look at them. I haven't got what they've got, so I haven't got anything to offer. Each of us and everyone has something to offer in our hearts and lives as we seek to serve God and serve our world. So start where you are. And the thought is this as well, is give and watch God's grace. And this is what this little boy did. I've got a few barley loaves and some fish, and they're small. He gave them, and as Jesus took them and broke them, and then distributed them, God's grace flows as we give. And that's what we learn from this. As we give our hearts and lives to him and give our service, no matter what we're doing in our lives, you can watch God's grace will flow through that service. And that's exactly what happened on this very day. God's grace flows. His power comes as we serve. We often look for God to do it, but God's calling you and I to step out, and then he will step up and we'll begin to sing. But don't be put off. And that's what we see with this boy. And the third thing is this, and the final point, and all three of these things come together to see a release of God's power. And it's this: little is much in the hands of Jesus. And this is spectacular. Very little can be much, can be huge in the hands of Jesus. It says Jesus gave thanks. Here's these small, rough, simple, cheap barley loaves and 2 sardine-like salted fish. And Jesus gave thanks, and as he broke the fish and broke the bread, it was distributed, and it multiplied. It absolutely multiplied to such an extent that it says in verses 41 to 44 in Mark's account, everyone was fed and satisfied. And that's in the region of it says 5,000 men. So they counted the men in those days. So you could look between 5 to up possibly 8,000 people, women and children. 5 would have been the minimum, 8 or 9,000. This was a huge crowd, and they were all satisfied and fed. And then they collected 12 basketfuls. This was a release of power and multiplication, and in the hands of Jesus, little becomes much. Wow, how amazing is that? A pauper's lunch is transformed into a king's banquet. And when you and I served, a pauper's lunch can be transformed into a king's banquet. I'm not saying that lightly. The power of God is often released through you and I as we serve him and give our lives, give our hands, give our hearts, and give our time and give our lives to him. God's grace flows through our giving. And this is an amazing account that shows that. By that, what I mean is God pours out his grace upon hearts and lives as we give our lives to him. It's a conduit. We become conduits of his power. It's quite amazing. We will often want to say, well, you go and do it, Lord. But God says, well, what about you? And I'll work through you and for you and amongst you. And, God's grace flows through our self-giving. And that's what we see in this story. And in such a way that it becomes a flood of mercy. The flow becomes a flood of mercy. And we see that on this day when the boy comes and brings the loaves and brings the fishes. He gives. And then God's grace, as Jesus prays, comes upon that gift, that offering, that service. And it becomes a flood of mercy as it feeds 8,000 to 9,000 people. It's incredible. It's an incredible story of the power of service. And may that encourage you as it encourages me as we seek to serve God, serve our world, make a difference, tell the world that Jesus lives and show the world that Jesus lives. And there lies the power of service. So let's step out and see God step up. And you do it today. And don't be put off by the task of what you have and what you don't have and what others are doing and what not doing. Do it, just do it. And as we serve, give and watch God's grace, his power flow around us and through us and amongst us. Let's see and taste and see and release that the Lord is truly good. God bless you. And thank you for joining us. May you know the power of God flowing through your heart and life as you seek to serve him and serve those around us. God bless you.
Let our songs be your welcome. Let our songs be a sign that we are here for hearts are open, nothing here is hidden. You are our one desire. You alone are holy, only you are worthy, God. Let your fire fall down. To you our hearts are open, nothing here is hidden. You are our one desire. You alone are holy, only you are worthy, God. Let your fire fall down. Oh, let your fire fall down. Let your fire fall down. Oh, we need your fire. We need your fire in our lives. Oh, renew us, revive us, speak to us again. Would you lead us, breathe on